This is a very short film about liberal democracy. It is the principal mode of governance that has existed in the Western world for over 150 years. The origins of democracy emerged in ancient Greece from the actions of an Athenian nobleman and political reformer called Cleisthenes. From its origins right up until the 18th and 19th century, democracy has traditionally been defined as rule by the poor, rule by the ignorant and incompetent at the expense of the higher classes and those in possession of the most property and power. Democracy sought to rid society of its class order and replace it with a classless or single-class society so that the wealth could be evenly distributed amongst its citizens. Through this equality would be brought about liberty and justice that had been previously unknown. All men would be equal and everyone would prosper. It would be a paradise on earth. Democracy in its earliest forms was utopian. Naturally, every attempt at utopian democracy ended in failure, for to destroy any existing class order, you must bring down the current high classes by any means necessary. They stand to lose the most from the new society, so they will be the most unwilling to relinquish their power. The French Revolution of 1789 saw its leaders resort to violence and terror to coerce the masses to a social outlook of collectivism. As a result, thousands died by guillotine and mob beatings. It showed the pursuit of liberty in this way resulted in the exact opposite of what it set out to achieve. Democracy led to tyranny. The economist Friedrich Hayek referred to this as the road to serfdom. From the aftermath of these violent attempts at utopian democracy, a new idea arose in the mid-19th century. This was liberal democracy. It shared a similar vision with its predecessor, but acknowledged from the outset that a class system was unavoidable and consequently attempted to add a democratic structure on top of it. There have only been three models of liberal democracy. The first model was championed by two democratic theorists, Jeremy Bentham and James Mill. What is the role of government? For Bentham and Mill, it was to provide social good, and this meant the greatest happiness for the greatest number. This was the utilitarian base, but the problem was how to measure the happiness of an entire society. What could make everyone happy? Bentham decided that it was the possession of material goods, or quite simply money. He thought money was so basic to the attainment of all other satisfactions that money alone could be taken as the measure of all of them. For Bentham, this meant that the best set of laws were those of a capitalist market framework, in which people are treated as selfish individuals competing with everyone else to maximise their individual pleasure. In doing so, they are able to contribute to a nation's wealth, or GNP. This maximisation of individual productivity would lead directly to a wealthy nation, and as a result, a wealthy and happy society. Liberal democracy was from here on conjoined with capitalism. For such a framework to function, it required a governmental body that would establish and nurture a free market society. Under Model 1, the leaders and decision-makers would be voted into power by a majority vote. However, if everyone was governed by self-interest as Bentham thought, then so too were those individuals who were chosen to lead. The only way to prevent the government oppressing its citizens was to make the governors frequently removable by the same people who placed them there. Therefore, Model 1 allocated every individual a single vote for self-protection against the government. A majority could then also vote a corrupt or oppressive government out of power. It is for this reason that the first model of liberal democracy would become known as protective democracy. Model 1 provided members of society with a vote of protection should any government become oppressive, but precious little else. It fitted the existing class structure, but did nothing to change it, nor bring about any equalities of any kind. And in the desire to be well governed, the majority of the working class chose their leaders from the middle class. In this way, the business of government remained the business of the rich, who could always obtain it by any means, good or bad. This first model of liberal democracy was neither inspired nor inspiring. There was no enthusiasm for the methods of governance, only for what it might provide the individual. In this model, with such a limited participatory role, democracy was a logical requirement, nothing more. Protective democracy soon fell apart. The rising social inequalities caused unrest in the working class, whose increasing literacy and strike action was a direct threat to GNP, and their conditions had become so blatantly inhumane that sensitive liberals could not accept the model as either morally justifiable or economically inevitable. A new model was needed. John Stuart Mill was the man instrumental in the formation of Model 2. He advocated a moral and democratic model that could be achieved through the participatory action of its individuals. Society could progress to levels of freedom and equality it had before struggled to achieve. Mill demanded that government must be responsible for its actions. It should communicate and encourage group discussion about how its people would like to be governed. Model 2 encouraged society to develop itself towards equality. It was known as developmental democracy. Mill rejected Bentham's idea that happiness must be measured in purely monetary terms. He insisted that the greatest aggregate happiness could be achieved by permitting and encouraging individuals to develop themselves. Development would make them capable of higher pleasures than merely what money might provide. Model 2 had an even shorter lifespan than its predecessor, but it was not for Mill's want of trying. The fundamental problem was once again the existing class structure. The uneven distribution of wealth and economic power already sustained an equally biased framework of development. Developed individuals already existed in society and thus already had more electoral weight. Those whom Mills considered undeveloped knew they had inferior electoral weight and their voice would not prevail, so naturally they lost all the will to participate and did not develop. Also more critical to the failure of Model 2 was that Mills supported the existing framework of the capitalist market to generate GNP. Under capitalism, the need for the individual to desire material goods and contribute to GNP requires him to see himself as nothing more than a consumer and appropriator. It is the only way of ensuring future satisfactory flow of money and goods. The problem is that this system gives little scope for individuals to see themselves as exactors and developers of their own capacities. As a result, all Model 2 could realistically hope for was to pave the way for a similar wave of exploitation. In the mid-20th century, Model 3 was offered as a replacement of the failed Model 2. It was championed by the economist Joseph Schumpeter in his book Capitalism, Socialism and Democracy, though to this day, however bizarre and alarmingly, all it amounts to is a reversion or slight elaboration of Model 1. The first act of Model 3 was to abolish the idealism and empty out the moral content of Model 2. In Model 3, the purpose of democracy is a tool to register the expressed desires of the people, not to contribute to what they might want or wish to become. Democracy is once again purely logical. It is a simple market mechanism for obtaining GNP. The voters are consumers and the politicians are entrepreneurs. Unlike Model 2, it is not the role of the voter to decide political issues and then choose representatives to carry them out, but rather to choose the politicians who will make the decisions for them. Citizens still retain the ability to replace an oppressive government, or rather one that does not encourage individual self-interest adequately enough. However, this ability is only possible when there is an obvious difference between the parties. Just like a market with so few sellers of goods, the range and price of those goods are limited. Model 3 is known as equilibrium democracy because the lack of competition for governance generated stability. In the current form, democracy functions exactly like advertising. The people neither raise nor decide the issues, but the issues that shape their fate are raised and decided for them. The wishes of the people are unimportant. It is how their wishes can be manipulated that takes precedence. Thus, the basic irreducible unit in the democratic process is not the individual with an independent autonomous set of demands, but it is the supplier of the goods. And this, by definition, is an authoritarian process. Like Model 1, the only function left for the people is the self-protection of an individual's vote. But this ability has been nullified, for the majority has not yet realised that tyranny is not a particular set of governors, but the system of governance itself. In equilibrium democracy, the equilibrium is apathy. Model 3 will only falter when societies stop preferring affluence as the unchallenged measure of happiness. This can only occur when society as a whole stops believing that market frameworks can provide affluence indefinitely without a global collapse. Doubts have been raised about the adequacy of this current system, but we are far from drafting or generating a new model. For many democratic theorists, participatory democracy is the ultimate goal towards a harmonious society. Participation is a valuable instrument in the achievement of a higher, more socially conscious system of governments and for a higher, more socially conscious set of individuals. But two questions must be raised before democracy can hope to evolve onto Model 4. Is participatory democracy achievable? And is it desirable? Participatory democracy has two important requisites: a change in people's consciousness of themselves and the reduction of the present social and economic inequalities. If individuals remain apathetic to the system, then the system of government will remain apathetic to the individual. The same can be said of present inequalities. If inequalities are not challenged, then a non-participatory political system is likely to be also accepted, particularly by the higher classes who are fearful of change and will always prefer the stability that keeps them on top. The trap that we now find ourselves in is that none of the necessary conditions of participatory democracy, challenges to inequality, a strong sense of community, and a change of social consciousness, can come about with more democratic participation than there is now. And whether you read Mill or Marx, it is only through involvement in joint political action that people can transcend their stunted consciousness of themselves as consumers and appropriators. It is a current popular thought that advances in new computer technologies and telecommunications may offer the key to producing a more participatory democratic system. It was in this spirit that in November 2008, the administration of US President-elect Barack Obama, months before his actual inauguration, set up Change.gov, an online political forum for citizens to vote for the most important issues they felt the new president should address on his first day in office. It was treated as a rehearsal for a more transparent, more participatory democratic conduct. As voted for, the number one most important issue facing a nation in the midst of two wars, a healthcare system in meltdown, and a collapsing economy was the legalization of medical marijuana.